What's going on, guys? My name is Chris, and today we're going to talk about helmets and body armor and shit. Now, here's the thing. As far as just helmets and body armor are concerned altogether, I fucking hate them. I hate living with them. I hate using them. They suck. But, our soldier and police friends, as well as a bunch of other people, have consistently asked about, what to do with their plate carriers and what to do with their helmets and stuff like that. So I figured I would go ahead and make this video, mostly as a, well, fuck you, here's your video type thing. So, when talking about this kind of stuff, the first thing that we're going to do here is I'm going to talk about the helmet, mostly because it's a little bit easier, right? Now, for my soldiering friends that do this all the time, and or for our SWAT guys or whatever that have asked a myriad of different questions revolving around helmets, I'm going to kind of sort of encompass them all into one thing, right? Because, yeah, I get it. There are a lot of different types of helmets out there, but for our soldier friends, they may not have anywhere near as much as far as options are concerned when it comes to this kind of thing. So, let's talk about this guy right here, the Mitch. Okay, now, with this individual piece of gear, a little more goes into it than a lot of people quite realize. Aside of the fact that it's just to save your dome from impacts and shit like that, it really does help just keep you not concussed if you do things correctly. Now, first and foremost, I'm not really going to get into much of the whole strap setup because that's fairly self-explanatory. The only thing that I will say is that when you throw the helmet on, when you throw it on, you need to be able to adapt this to what it is exactly that you're doing. Because if you run a configuration for a particular setup and just leave it there, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass in some regard. Now let's talk about night vision first. With night vision and stuff and all this shit just kind of hanging off of the top end of your head, you're going to want to go into your back straps here and tighten them up just a little bit, just to yank back on this guy a little, just so that it can support the weight that's up here. Now, it's not going to be perfect because it's never perfect, but when you yank those guys back, it keeps you from having to do this all day, right? Or rather, all night. Now, when it comes to actually wearing the thing and setting it up, now whether or not you're left to right-handed, you can set up the clip to where it benefits you well. And the way that it's set up, you don't want it so tight that it's making big, huge creases on your face. But you also don't want it so loose that you can't bend over or do things and work on shit without it coming down and blinding you. Now, with regards to that, a lot of guys have a lot of issues with their helmets when they go into the prone and shit like that to do their shooting or whatever. But before I get into that, I am going to go into this. There are a lot of guys that talk a lot about, how loose these should be and that they should always be tightened down and that kind of thing. And over time, what I was basically told as far as just how convenient this can be is the exact opposite. Because for me, it's if I'm fucking around with night vision or whatever, I have to be able to loosen these up. If I'm putting a set of contacts on, I have to be able to loosen them up. If I'm not, and if I'm just going to be running around with this on my dome and we're fucking around during the day without contacts or whatever, I want it to be a little tighter so that it doesn't wobble around and do all kinds of crazy shit on my head. So over time, it's one of those things where I just kind of kept these loose and just dealt with people bitching over time, mostly because, you know what, I know what's going to work for me. The tighten down all the way thing may work for some guys, but the more that I look around and the more soldiers that I meet and the more guys that do this a lot that I get to talk to, the less it's actually a thing. So I keep mine loose, or rather, I don't keep them tightened down so I can adjust them for what it is that I'm trying to do. Next thing, if you'll notice in here, right, there's a particular pad set up. Now, how these come are totally different as far as the pad arrangement than what's taught in a lot of circles. Usually you have this big round thing up in the center here. You have these two front and rear of it, and then you have these little guys making like little horizontal pads pads on either side. Now, the problem with that, and the problem with how that's usually taught, is the simple fact that with that big round disc on top of your head, okay, 2 square pads here, and then 4 rectangular pads here, what that does when you throw this thing on your head is that over time it'll just start to squeeze your shit, okay? Especially if you have to tighten them up for whatever reason. And over time it just gets ridiculously annoying to wear. Now, granted, me personally, the first chance that I get to rip off a helmet, I'm going to, as you guys can probably see. But if the circumstances call for me wearing a helmet for a very long period of time, I can't sit there and just be fussing with it and it just sit there and press on the sides of my head and shit and just create big, huge fucking headaches. I need it to be able to do its job and not cause me any issues in the meantime. The second thing that you have an issue with is, with all helmets across the board, you're going to have a heat issue. Now, you bleed a lot of heat out of the top of your head. And with the Mitch, a lot of it's just going to kind of stay there, right? There's been some evolutions in how helmets are made, and there's little vents so that it helps keep you a little bit cooler and that kind of thing. But as far as most fucking people that wear helmets in their profession, that's just not the case. So the reason for this particular pad setup is several-fold. Now, number one, this big, huge disc up front is just going to keep the helmet from creeping forward on me too terribly much. Now, especially when you have gear on, like salt bags or rucks or whatever, and you go prone, it's a natural tendency to whatever's on your back is going to try and push on this. And if it doesn't, you just leaning forward or whatever to, acquire your sights will cause a natural amount of shift forward. Having the larger pad up front prevents that movement forward, and it keeps it essentially going only so far. Okay, and this is assuming that your straps are properly sized for you and all that shit. The next thing is that as it lines itself out a little bit further, you start to see that I use the square pads as sort of the spine, right? And then I essentially use these pads, right, to rather, instead of forming several points on the helmet to where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's more like one continuous piece. Now, what that does is that essentially prevents the squishing part as far as the cushions and stuff are concerned. And what it also does is that it leaves a lot of open space on the sides. And if you have a lot of open space on the sides of the helmet, it's not like it's going to completely alleviate the issue, but what it will do is that it will help vent some of the heat out from your head and make life a little bit less shit, okay? Because however you want to slice it, life is pretty shit with helmets. Now, moving on from that, we're going to talk about plate carriers and how I set mine up and all that shit, right? Now, how I set mine up is sort of twofold, because I want to be able to have options for things that I would, quote, need, but I also want to put stuff on that I want. Now, first thing here, let's talk about the carrier itself. Now, when we're messing around with the carrier, whatever your gun hand is, absolutely no widgets of any kind are on your gun hand side. Now, the reason for this is that when we start talking about throwing on plate carriers and stuff, a lot of talk gets tossed around about sidearms, right? Well, if I want to throw on a sidearm, it's usually hooked up to the belt and it drops just low enough from the rig to clear everything. And I don't want anything in the way of that pistol, ever, right? Because if I need to get to it, life is already pretty shit because I've probably gone through 4 magazines, or I'm in a really small space. I don't want anything interfering with whether or not I can get to my pistol if I use it. The second thing is just primary gear and then auxiliary gear. Now, for me personally, if I'm wearing a plate carrier, I'm going to orient literally everything that I'm doing toward the rifle. So that means, additional widgets and bullshit that could go up here, I pull all of that stuff away, mostly so that I can get clear to the magazines, and it's just less stuff up front that'll sit there and try and push up on your diaphragm while you're in the prone or anything like that. So that's one big thing that I'd rather not fuck around with as far as just where the gear goes. Now, for those of you who are messing around with comms and all that stuff, you might have to get a little bit inventive. Me personally, I try to go to the offhand side, and that's where all of my cords and wires and shit are, and I'm very mindful to make sure that, well, me personally, I'm very mindful to use the cummerbund itself as a method to secure some of this stuff down as far as the molly. Okay, so for like your embedders or whatever, I do my very best to keep all that shit clear from up here, right? So what that eventually means is that I'm zip tying and wiring stuff down to where it's cleared out as much as possible from this space right here. The next thing that I'm looking at here is these are not magazine pouches for a pistol. What this current configuration is for a dedicated rifle only, because there's like 26 other assholes with rifles. And if mine goes down, I can depend on those dudes plus machine guns for like route clearance or whatever while I'm fixing my problem. Now, there are some guys that say, oh, that's a roll of the dice. I'd rather have a secondary and all that kind of shit. Well, I can understand that, but it's worked really good for the United States military for a really long time. And in all honesty, I want to shave as much weight as possible. So having something hang off of my left-hand side is something that I want to avoid. That's my personal preference, though. What this really is for like a multi-tool and a handheld flashlight. You can't always solve your white light problems with a fucking gun light, right? So now this is slick as is, mostly because my stuff has gone to other shit for the moment. But these two pouches really are for like a Gerber, like a multi-tool. And anyone who's fucked around with these for a long time or has done, deployments in Afghanistan or whatever, will be able to tell you that a multi-tool saves your ass on more than one occasion. So I'll use a multi-tool in this pouch, and then a little handheld light, mostly because that's what this pouch was made for. Just I use a better handheld light than the one that was issued, and that little handheld light will go in here, so I can just reach back and get it whenever I need it. Now, as far as an IFAK is concerned, right, and that's like an individual made kit, first aid kit, IFAK. Me personally, I get it the fuck out of my way as much as possible. There are some guys that throw it on their backs. Chances are, if I'm laid out, I'll be on my back, right? But if I'm really fucked up and I need medical attention, what the IFAK is for is that it's not for me, okay, to use on other people. It's for other people to use on me. You see what I'm saying? So that's where you have like your softies and all that shit that are really easy to use with two hands, but near impossible with one hand. And you just keep all of that stuff in here. And it's out of my way. It's out of my range of motion. I can do whatever it is that I need to do. And it's not in the fucking way for me personally. Mostly because it's not me that's going to be using it. It's somebody else. So if I'm rendering aid to somebody, throwing on a tourniquet or what have you, I will be going into his IFAK and all that stuff, right? So there you go. Now, as far as sizing the plate carrier, putting it on your body, that kind of thing. Now, here's the thing with me, right? As far as the plate carriers are concerned, you need to preserve as much as your mobility as possible, right? So more minimal plate carriers are usually better. This is older tech, and it's a prototype that was discontinued from Protective Products. So realistically speaking, if this was the shit back in the day, honestly, and this is quite a few years old at the moment now, but it still is rather functional. It can be used as an example for this. So if you're running around with a Cry JPC or a London Bridge or anything like that, this is applicable for a lot of what you guys are doing. Now, here's the thing. Before I get into sizing and all of that, I'm going to sit here and talk about plate carrier cost, because there are some guys that thumb their nose at some of the more expensive carriers that are out there. Look at this is some shit that you are going to end up wearing for a long period of time. It supports plates, and it needs to be able to properly house plates so that they do their job if you're fucking shot. Don't skimp, okay? Don't be that fucking douche. Just get a proper carrier. And while you're at it, if you're going after plates, go after level 4 damn plates. Because here's the thing. A lot of people that are just kind of like, level 3 and all of that will stop ball and all that, and that's what most people use. You got you've got a real wrong-headed approach, I personally believe, to this. Because anyone who's really, really serious about this has probably got, quote, go time ammunition. And that shit has probably got a penetrator or something in it, right? Now, guys that are getting their hands on like M855A1, that shit performs exactly, for the most part, like 7N6. And M855 isn't a slouch, and it'll still defeat level 3, right? So, don't skimp when it comes to this. Because first thing, if you skimp on protection, this should be self-explanatory. It's like going halfway on a seatbelt, okay? When you get wrecked, you want it to do its job. Second, if you skimp on the carrier, all it's really going to do is it's going to increase your suffering. Because if it starts to fall apart, if it wears loose, if it shifts plates and shit around all the time, the first thing that you're gonna have to deal with is a lot of pain, and that's no fucking bueno in my personal opinion. So here's the thing: as far as sizing it, right? There's a myriad of different ways that different plate carriers size to individuals, but the rule of thumb generally is that you want the top edge of your plate to start about here, okay? Now, the reason why it stops about here is because it ends round about here, okay? If it ends round about here and it starts here, you can see the size of this plate, okay? The width of it is about here. All of the really important shit on my body is covered, okay? Now, I got a medium carrier on, and that means whatever it is that you do, you essentially have to size your carrier to your plate. Whichever one that you end up taking on your body, and that's for you to figure out, it needs to essentially cover most of the really important shit on your body. Now, as far as the rest of your stomach and below, in all honesty, this is to prevent heart and lungs from getting fucked up. Okay? So as far as the size plate is concerned, keep concentrated on that more than anything else. Okay, if you want sides, I suggest the thinnest profile that you could possibly get, because thick profile side plates tend to dig into hips, and that's no fucking bueno. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and strip this off, and we're going to talk about like how to mount it up and how to make sure that everything is sized correctly. All right, so as far as the carrier is concerned, right, first and foremost, it's one of those things where when you size it up, depending on which one you end up getting first, if you end up with the carrier first or the plates, you really want to make sure that as you're starting the initial size up for the plates and the carrier, you want to size the carrier to you first before you insert some plates. Mostly because this is just a little bit easier, right? Now, this may mean adjusting the straps up top. This may mean going into the back end of the carrier and pulling some things tighter. I know that IOTVs require a lot of that kind of shit. And it's also essentially to make sure that where it rides is centered up as far as where the weight tugs on the left or right hand side and where that plate go ahead and starts. So just be cognizant of that, and just be sure that as you're sizing up, the following happens. If somebody grabs onto your carrier by one of the plates or the pouches or whatever and starts to tug, your body should go with it rather than the whole carrier swinging about. And the reason for this is that if you have looser plates, first of all, the weight just sags and it's not really attached to your body. And that just makes life really shitty on not just your back, but your shoulders and everything else. So you don't want the weight to sag real hard and just constantly be pulling on you. You really want it to be essentially a second set of skin. And an additional reason for that is that if the plates take an impact, right, if they are affixed in the spot that they're supposed to be, they don't add on to any extra damage to your body. Because look at, even if you have plates on, this is going to suck, right? And if you essentially don't give that plate a solid abutment to absorb a lot of that impact force, it can actually push in and either break shit or make life far more terrible for you, as far as just what the bruising is going to be like and everything else. So make sure that this stuff is tight. Now, me personally, as far as a quote go time thing, I make sure that my right side, because this is just the side that I pick, the right side is closed and properly adjusted pretty much at all times. And what I end up doing after that is I'll leave the left side open. So when I go into it, I can just snake this guy in snake my head in and my arm through one side, just so that's a lot simpler to do. You don't have to sit here and do this whole attaching thing to both sides. And if one side is pretty much always cinched up, you can tell based on the tension on the other side of the cummerbund, you know, whether or not that you're pulling enough slack out of it or anything else. Because a lot of times the cummerbund, meaning this thing, right, is loose. So if you pull real hard on one side, it'll tug on the other side. So if you're loose, or rather if you're too tight on this end, you'll have to pull this away and then come around, so it's a little bit easier. Now, for those of you who don't want side plates or a cummerbund, a lot of carriers come with a cinch-up device of some kind that pulls the front and rear plates together. Generally speaking, that's what I would personally recommend to people for the most part, is just, you know, front and rear plates are pretty much what you need. And the main reason for that is A, weight, and B, mobility. But with this particular setup, I have side plates in them. So I'm going to go ahead and cinch this side up. Once I got this side cinched up, the next thing that I'm going to do is make sure that this is properly tightened up. And then from there, I'm just going to simply open the carrier up, attach that Velcro there, and just kind of wiggle in here properly. Now, here's the thing as far as the carrier is concerned. You can actually see it here. If someone were to hook me by the strap and try to take me, it takes my body with me rather than, and you can even see it. Like, if I'm sitting here trying to pull on it, it's taking my whole body with me rather than the whole carrier scooting in one direction. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this won't suck, because if you start training in this stuff, any soldier or SWAT officer or whatever that's done some training in plates is going to tell you right now, it's way harder, it's way harder to breathe when your heart rate's up, because it feels like you're just in a vice, right? And the first time that you throw magazines in these pouches, you'll figure out that your prone position kind of sucks too. And really, as far as all of that's concerned, you're just kind of fucked, I guess. The only way to make it better is to do it more, and it's not even really that it gets better over time. What really ends up happening is that you just get used to how much ass it sucks, and that's it, really. So, as far as the carriers are concerned, that's essentially how I set it up. It's not very complicated. Just be mindful of the things that that I've had to say, because I've seen a lot of guys show up with loose carriers, stuff that is not adjusted to them properly. I've seen it in a lot of classes that I've either taught or attended, dudes that have really cheap carriers that try to fall apart, won't stay properly fitted, have plates swing about and all that shit. Just make sure that what you're doing is with a quality carrier, and it's a quality type of armor that you're using. And a really good rule of thumb is that, contrary to AK stuff, pretty much everything Chinese is fucking garbage, right? And I might do a video on good carriers and armor selection that I've dealt with in the past, but I'll save that for another video. Right now, this is just kind of a setup type deal. So, if you want to come out and train with us, we have more classes available. We are going to Del Rio, Texas for our Pistol 1 class. It's a 2-day thing. You can check that out in the description below. And there are a variety of other classes that we have available right now. We're getting ready to go to Montana very soon. As far as Rifle 1 and 2 class is concerned, that's going to be in September-ish. So that'll post rather soon. You know, come out and learn what you want to learn. If you're a school resource officer or a teacher that's permitted to carry a gun on campus, we train you for free forever. Now, there will be a little bit of a verification process, and we'll trade some emails back and forth. But if you're in that lot in life and you want some training, you can get it from us for free forever. Okay. So there's that. If you want to support us on Patreon, that would be fucking great. That money either goes toward bullets for the channel here, or, and which is the vast majority of that money, ends up going to our Train to Soldier project that we're doing, where we pull soldiers or guys volunteer to have their flight, food, ammo, and gear paid for for the classes that we bring them out on, and that's just something that we do to essentially give those donations a place to go, as well as fund our little review thing here. So there's that. And also, for those of you who are gluttons for punishment that want to come out and train with us a lot for not very much, if you sign up for $35 a month, you can train with us for as long as you want, so long as you are signed up to that program. And that is a system specifically designed to be abused by people that come out and take back-to-back classes with us. And it's mostly because we thoroughly understand this shit costs a lot, and for especially in the times that we're in, it's probably a good idea to get trained more than anything else. So there's that. If you also want to join our discussion page on Facebook, we have that open. It's a pretty good group, and a lot of dudes are in there doing a lot of good things, not just for the group, but for the nation, and keeping everybody's attention keyed up. So that's the end of that. What do you think about all of this, right? As far as just the helmet setups and the plate carrier setups are concerned, what are your methods for it? Because I'm always open to new ideas. So, milling that in your head and leaving a little comment in the section below. Remember, guys, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.